Today, we're going to start with Psalm 119, and it starts where I'm only going to do the first part, which is Aleph. It starts with Aleph, which is you know what that is?
First letter of the
First
Hebrew
letter, and it's also a number. Okay, so it represents the beginning of all things. Okay, and here we go. Blessed are those whose ways are blameless, who walk according to the law of the Lord. Blessed are those who keep his statutes and seek him with all their heart. They do no wrong, but follow his ways. You have laid down precepts that are to be fully obeyed. Oh, that my ways were steadfast in obeying your decrees. Then I would not be put to shame when I consider all your commands. I will praise you with an upright heart as I learn your righteous laws. I will obey your decrees. Do not utterly forsake me. So this particular psalm is focusing on the blessings of those who follow the law. And the law may be something we talk about today, as we start chapter 3, which is chapter on James. It says the structure of this particular one starts with Aleph and then goes to Beth, Gimel, 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, whatever, with the letters of the alphabet. So James, the brother, now this is the James that isn't there are two other James, there are two apostles, right? Is it only two with James?
Right, I think so.
Yeah, I think it's James, right. But this is James, the brother of Jesus, that we're going to talk about today. And do you know him by any other names?
Jacob,
right. And have you heard of James the Lesser?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And James the Just, or James the Just. Okay. And what do you know about James, the brother of Jesus?
Nothing. I'll volunteer.
Yeah, no, I don't know anything. He was the head of the way in Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
Did that
after Peter vacated
the Jerusalem,
mm-hmm.
because of threats and things.
Right.
So we really don't know much about him in the Gospels.
Mm-hmm.
There's no reference to him, or there's only one reference to the Gospels.
They say that, well, Evans says that his name appears once in the New Testament Gospels, but it appears in Mark and Matthew with the same quote, the same passage, basically. And then it appears in Paul's letters, that type of thing. So,
why was he called the lesser?
well, because who would be the greater?
The apostle, the disciple, James.
Right.
But it seems sort of, I don't know, it seems sort of against the way Christ taught to attribute somebody to be greater or lesser.
James, during Christ's lifetime, James wasn't on his favorites, or Jesus wasn't on James's favorites list.
As far as we know.
Yeah.
Little brothers always get picked on.
That's right. It's the sibling rivalry thing. We talked about that, I think, a few weeks ago, where think of what Jesus's siblings, what they would have been up against. Not to be like Jesus Christ.
Or also the religious community everywhere not liking him, and they're in
Right.
the religious community.
Right. So his name appears in Mark, and in Mark 6:3, where they're talking about when Jesus goes back to his hometown and is going to be teaching in the synagogue. People were saying, "Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son and the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Okay. And the same thing, almost identical, is in Matthew 13:55. Isn't this the carpenter's son? Where did this man get all of it? Aren't these his sisters with us? Where did this man get all of these things? And James's name is, brothers of James. And James is always mentioned first. And what does that usually mean? Like James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas.
I would assume that's the where they were born in.
The order. Yeah. Usually age.
Or maybe that was the list Mary went down when she was trying to yell at one.
The four names are James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon.
Oh, that's easy. It's alphabetical.
And in Matthew, it's also James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas.
Oh, it's not
Okay.
the alphabet that well. Alphabetical.
But who knows, Simon might have been called something else.
Yeah.
Just
Simon.
alphabetical. Yeah. And then in Galatians, Paul was writing, then after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to get acquainted with Cephas, and who's that? Peter. Okay. And stayed with him 15 days. I saw none of the other apostles, only James, the Lord's brother. I assure you before God that what I'm writing is no lie. So James is mentioned in the New Testament in very few places, but in Paul's letters you will hear about James, more. And in Acts you'll hear about James more. So there was no hint that James was among Jesus's followers while Jesus was alive. Okay. And even, in the Gospel of John, when we studied that, we might have remembered that John tells us that the brothers of Jesus didn't believe in him and they were not numbered among his disciples. And so that's in John 7, 3-5. And that says, after Jesus went around in Galilee, he did not want to go about in Judea because the Jewish leaders there were looking for a way to kill him. But when the Jewish festival of tabernacles was near, Jesus's brothers said to him, "Leave Galilee and go to Judea so that your disciples there may see the works you do. No one wants to become a public figure. No one who wants to become a public figure acts in secret. Since you are doing these things, show yourself to the world, for even his own brothers did not believe in him." So that's John's opinion of James at that time. But then somewhere halfway through the book of Acts, James comes up again. Okay. And James, the brother of Jesus, suddenly appears to think to be the head of the Jesus movement. So what do you think might have caused that? Here, he didn't believe Jesus was living, alive. Here, after Jesus is no longer with them, James is, at the top of the scale there with wanting him to, being in charge of the Jesus movement in Jerusalem.
Well, the resurrection had a lot to do with a whole lot of things.
Right. That's it. That's what Evans is saying.
It's got to be the resurrection. Yeah. I remember Parker, who's not been churched much, and we talk about Christ in our lives and how he leads us when she's with us. And so I asked her one day, what do you believe about Jesus? And she goes, I think he's, the Son of God. And I said, why do you think that? And she goes, his tomb is empty. He rose from the dead. And that's power. And frankly, I want to be associated with power like that. There you go, from the voice of a 13-year-old at that time. I want some power like that. Don't we all?
On our side.
That's right.
Right. So in Corinthians, and what he said is the earliest surviving written account of the appearance of the risen Christ is what Paul writes in Corinthians 15, 5-7. I don't know if anyone has Corinthians open, but I guess I could read this.
I got it.
Is it
What
the
is it?
first one?
First
Yeah,
Corinthians
yeah.
5-7?
Yeah, read, start at 3.
3 and read through 7?
3-7.
For I, on my part, though absent in body but present in spirit, I have already judged him who has so committed this as though I were present.
Corinthians 15.
Oh,
No,
15,
15,
sorry.
5-7.
Okay. Corinthians 15. Sorry.
Sometimes this is
We're all
Bible's a
different
little bit better
chapters.
than mine.
Yeah.
Sorry, I might not have said it clearly.
That's all right. 15, 5-7. And that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 brethren at one time, most of whom remain until now, but some have fallen asleep. And then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles.
And so he's listing James separately and then to all the apostles. So James is not considered here an apostle. Okay. So it was Jesus's appearance, as Harold had mentioned, after the resurrection that transformed James, we believe, into a believer. And Paul's language seems to suggest that James was not regarded as an apostle. He's not one of the 12. His kinship with Jesus could explain his elevation, but that's only, a thought. There's nothing to show that. In Galatians 1:19, there's another statement, a verse that is, then after 3 years, I read this previously. After 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to get acquainted with Cephas and stayed with him 15 days. I saw none, but I saw James, the Lord's brother, in Jerusalem. And then another in Galatians 2, it's mentioned that for God, who was at work in Peter as an apostle to the circumcised, was also at work in me, Paul, an apostle to the Gentile. James, Cephas, and John, those esteemed as pillars, gave me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship when they recognized the grace given to me. They agreed that we should go to the Gentiles and they are to be circumcised. So James is apparently one of the pillars. And where does the pillars come from? It's right. It's holding up the walls of the temple. Holding up a foundation. Like Jesus is the foundation, but they are the pillars. Within the community. And then in Acts, James is mentioned as being a part of the group of believers who pray in the upper room. When it says, then the apostles returned to Jerusalem from the hill called the Mount of Olives, a Sabbath day's walk from the city. When they arrived, they went upstairs to the room where they were staying. Those present were Peter, John, James and Andrew, Philip and Thomas, Bartholomew and Matthew, James, son of Alphaeus, and Simon the Zealot, and Judas, son of James. They all joined together constantly in prayer, along with the women and Mary, the mother of Jesus, with his brothers. So, you know, his brothers were present, you know, at that time, which I had never thought of that.
And I'm sorry, Susan, when was that? When, what? where
This
were-
was apparently what Evans is saying is that James was present at the Last Supper. Now I don't believe it because he's not in the painting.
Took a snapshot of it.
I guess he was at the bathroom.
These guys were just the ones on the podium, you know. Who knows how many people? were
That's
there.
right. There might have been a whole crowd there.
Yeah.
Who knows?
But you wonder if he wasn't really a follower of Jesus until after the
That's right.
resurrection. Why
Why
would
was
he
he
have
Why would
been
he have been?
at the Last Supper?
Right.
Plus his
Yeah,
mother made him cook.
And not always.
It was a Seder meal, so, you know, why not?
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Family.
So what was the citation book, or book were you in?
At Acts
Okay.
1:14.
Oh, here we go. Okay, oh, this is when Matthias was chosen to replace Judas. It's the heading.
Uh-huh.
114.
So this wasn't the Last Supper. This was after.
This was after. Yeah, in the
After.
upper room.
This
So
was
that
after.
makes
Yeah,
sense.
that makes sense.
Yes.
After
That does-
Jesus'
yeah, that does.
ascension.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the past before his ascension. So then they returned to Jerusalem.
Mhm.
Do we know how far they could walk on the Sabbath? I think it's interesting, they said
The Sabbath days.
this was a Sabbath day's journey, because they were limited as to how far they could walk on
Oh,
the
no, I
Sabbath.
don't.
I
Well,
was
they were at
thinking
Mount
that too.
Olivet,
Must
at the
be
Mount called
limited.
Olivet, so they weren't far.
Right, but you know, it's interesting that they quantified it that way, as if we would know what that meant.
Well, in those days we would have.
That's true.
That's
That's
what
what
Gentiles, so we
That's
don't
what
know.
That's what Google is for.
Right, but the Mount of Olives was,
Yeah, I know,
Just
but still,
outside the
you know,
All right, it wasn't
you know,
very.
I'm an accountant, I want to know.
Look it up.
It depends on where you start. That's what a 7 days walk is. But Evans brings up Jerome, okay, here with regard to why James is now a leader.
3/4 of a mile.
That's not far.
That's it.
It's a
That's
Sabbath,
down,
they weren't
that's down
allowed
to
to
the
work.
end of the street.
To work, anything more than that's considered work. 3/4 of a mile.
So Evans provides some information from Jerome, who was a Christian scholar, an expert in Greek and Hebrew. He studied in Hebrew in Bethlehem. He supervised the translation of the Old and New Testaments into Latin, which is called the
Vulgate.
Vulgate. Oh, you're good. You've been studying all your life.
You know, the Sabbath day walk explains, I guess, why there was a synagogue everywhere there were 10 families.
Yeah.
Hmm,
oh,
yeah, good point. In Jerome, the passage that Evans brings up is Jerome from the, I guess it's the Vulgate, but it's VIRILL number 2 or whatever. And it says, and when the Lord Jesus had given the linen cloth to the servant of the priest, he went to James and appeared to him. Okay, so it said that Jesus, the risen Christ, had appeared to Jesus in the gospel or in Acts, but it's here, this is in a different writing with Jerome.
which was much later. Yeah.
Right.
Jerome was like in the hundreds, I think.
Right, it was 140.
Okay.
140 is what's estimated. And he appeared to James, for James had sworn that he would not eat bread from that hour in which he had drunk the cup of the Lord until he could see him risen from among them that sleep. So that's what made me think that he was at the Last Supper. And shortly thereafter, the Lord said, "Bring." After he shows himself to James, or appears to James, he says, "Bring the table and the bread." And immediately it is added, he took the bread and blessed it and broke it and gave it to James the just, and said to him, "My brother, eat your bread, for the Son of Man is risen from among them that sleep." So that would make an impact on you and possibly have you lead the Jesus movement.
Oh, yes.
That could happen.
Right. And Evans gets into what is the significance of the linen cloth? Well, that could be burial, either the wrapping or the linen cloth over his face. And what is this? And what is the servant of the priest? He gets into, and when the Lord had given the linen cloth to the servant of the priest, he went and showed and appeared to James. What is that about?
It's about proving to the Sanhedrin that he rose, because the linen cloth was ritualistic face cloth, and it was put over the face at death. Giving it back sent a message: I'm here. You did not, kill me.
Yeah. And in Evans had stated that what they thought about the person, that the servant of the priest, it says perhaps the priest servant is Malchus, Malchus, and in John 18, John 18:10 mentions that person. It says when Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name is Malchus. So, and gave it to the servant of the priest. When he had given the linen cloth to the servant of the priest. Now, your guess is as good as mine as whether or not there's accuracy there.
Well, he gave it to him something visual, because he was hard of hearing.
No laughing in this class. I've already said that.
Harold's weak to be right.
It says of greater importance here, Evans says, is the prominence given to James here. James had sworn not to eat bread until Jesus had risen. He made his oath when he said he had drunk from the cup of the Lord. It alludes to the Last Supper and runs parallel to Jesus's vow not to drink wine. Okay, so in Mark, Matthew, and Luke, we hear Jesus saying, "Truly I tell you, I will not drink again from the fruit of the vine until the day when I drink it new in the kingdom." Similar statement in Matthew 26:29 and Luke 22. And then, or eat the Passover in Luke. Also, when the hour came, Jesus and his apostles reclined at the table, and he said to them, "I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I tell you, I will not eat it again until it finds fulfillment in the kingdom of God." So all of this trying to just show how James, becomes more prominent. So what kind of leader do you think James was? How did he relate to other leaders in Jesus and the Jesus movement? We get into a new section that Evans is talking about. And he brings up Corinthians, the verse in 1 Corinthians 15, number 7 again. And I think, is that the one that you read? 15:5-7.
Yeah, 7.
Yeah, that's
and then
the
he
same
appeared
one.
to James, then to all the apostles.
Right. And then in Acts So they nominated 2 men, Joseph called Barabbas, also known as Justus, and Matthias, and they prayed, Lord, everyone's heart, you know everyone's heart. So that's when they chose him to become the 12th apostle, Matthias, become the 12th apostle. In Galatians 2:9 is when Paul calls James the pillar. I think we've read that section before. James and Cephas and John, those esteemed pillars. And we talked about how the upright frames in the tabernacle, are the pillars. So the New Testament refers to a pillar in the new temple. He who conquers, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God, in Revelations, is said. So James, the brother of Jesus, was held in high esteem in the early church and even among some non-believers. And Acts does recount some significant moments in the life of the early church, which James plays a leading role. We have the next statement or the next verse that Evans brings up is in Acts 12:1-5. And we can see that, get that.
Got it. About that time, King Herod laid violent hands upon some who belonged to the church. He had James, the brother of John, killed with the sword. After he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter also. This was during the festival of unleavened bread. When he had seized him, he put him in prison and handed him over to 4 squads of soldiers to guard him, intending to bring him out to the people after the Passover. While Peter was kept in prison, the church prayed fervently to God for him.
So we're not told why Agrippa is arresting these Christians. Okay, but here he did execute, this is the demise of James, okay, the son of Zebedee. And the church is praying for Peter, who makes a miraculous escape later, and safely reaches the home of a woman called Mary, the son of John Mark, who later accompanies Paul on his first missionary journey. But this is when Peter and a lot of the apostles are going to be leaving Jerusalem because they've already killed James, and now they're threatening the others, and so they're getting ready to head out. And so James is mentioned in the conclusion of the story, which is in 12:13-17.
Want me to read that?
Herod tries to appease the Romans in every possible way, and he builds temples to their gods, all sorts of things. So it could well be that he turns on the followers as a token to Rome.
Okay, where am I going to stop?
Go 13-17.
Okay. When he knocked at the outer gate, a maid named Rhoda came to answer. On recognizing Peter's voice, she was so overjoyed that instead of opening the gate, she ran in and announced that Peter was standing at the gate. They said to her, "You are out of your mind." But she insisted that it was so. They said, "It is his angel." Meanwhile, Peter continued knocking, and when they opened the gate, they saw him and were amazed. He motioned to them with his hand to be silent and described for them how the Lord had brought him out of the prison. And he added, "Tell this to James and to the believers." Then he left and went to another place.
So tell it to James. When you have Peter, someone who is at the head, telling it to James, where do you think James is in the positioning now?
He's pretty close up there to Peter.
Pass this on to James, okay?
If he's like, I gotta go somewhere else, because they're gonna be coming
Yeah,
to look.
yeah.
They're gonna be looking.
Tell James and the brothers, and he left Jerusalem for another place. Okay, so tell James implies that James is second in command, and that James will stay in Jerusalem. Okay, and if everyone else is being persecuted, why would James not be? Any ideas about that? What about you, Harold? Why wasn't James persecuted?
Beats me.
Well, I wonder if he didn't make any trouble while Jesus was here and Jesus is gone and he's looking, he's never anything. But he's trying to keep the faith going, so I would think he would be a candidate.
Yeah, it says Evan says that there's no evidence that James was condemned by the temple priests or threatened, or there's no evidence that he condemned the temple priests or that he threatened the destruction of the temple. The religious devotion of James was such that the temple authorities saw no reason to take action against him. Okay, so he must have had a lot of friends, you know, done a lot of favors, you know, whatever, beforehand, you know, before Jesus rose or whatever, and he had a following, you know, people that liked him. We assume that when Peter left Jerusalem, James, the brother of Jesus, assumed the leadership role there. And then where did Peter go from here? Do you remember that? He visited Antioch and eventually went to Rome. So what do we learn from Acts 12:17? In the absence of Peter, James becomes the new leader, and that the church turns to James for guidance. Okay. And what were the big questions of the day in the early church there with Paul and Peter?
Should Gentiles convert to Judaism in order to become Christians?
Right. Big question.
And not just
Yeah.
circumcision was the biggest issue, but dietary laws and
Right.
all
The
that.
big debate was, and when was Christ coming back was another big discussion.
Right.
Yeah.
So
So the people of the community, of the Jesus movement community, were going to be turning to James for guidance in, hey, James, do Gentiles need to become Jewish? Hey, James, to what extent do they need to conform to the Jewish faith and practice and join the church, to be circumcised, to observe the Sabbath, to eat kosher food, you know, to follow the rules of purity and the law of Moses?
right, all 613 of them.
Right, right.
With that-
Not traveling more than 3/4 of a mile
Sunday.
on Sunday.
Which is possibly flawed, but I mean, aren't there something like 600 laws in the
As far as the Jewish laws, yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, I thought you meant the number of believers.
the law of 613 of them.
It's kind of like Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism. Theravada is strict to the original ideas, no change to this, and you have to be very formal. Mahayana is taking in more wider group of people, and it moves and changes all the time. One stays and never changes any of the words or anything. The other one gets bigger and changes.
The next passage, it says this question is going to be debated. Like, what kind of a leader was James? What decision did he make regarding this? And so in Acts 15, 1-5.
Got it.
Okay.
Then certain individuals came down from Judea and were teaching the brothers. And were teaching, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. And after Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and debate with them, Paul and Barnabas and some of the others were appointed to go up to Jerusalem to discuss this question with the apostles and the elders. So they were sent on their way by the church, and as they passed through both Phoenicia and Samaria, they reported the conversion of the Gentiles and brought great joy to all the believers. When they came to Jerusalem, they were welcomed by the church, the apostles, and the elders, and they reported all that God had done with them. But some believers who belonged to the sect of the Pharisees stood up and said, "It is necessary for them to be circumcised in order to keep the law of Moses."
So what do you think how do you think James is going to respond to this?
James voted with Paul.
Which was a surprise.
And just let's remember, why was it a big deal in the Jewish faith? If you remember, that's back when there were covenants made back in Abraham's day. Part of the covenant was to, shed blood, make some sort of mark physically. So this goes all the way back to Abraham, the importance of circumcision. Now, it wasn't just, it was a big deal. That's why it was such a big debate.
Right. The Pharisee believers in Jesus say that Gentiles must become Jewish converts. They must convert to Judaism. Okay. And all the things associated with that. But it wasn't Paul's view that this needed to happen. And so there was, in Acts, Paul and Barnabas returned from the journey. Paul doesn't require Gentiles convert to Judaism. His preaching is contradicted, and he's sometimes driven from towns, regarding that. It says in one letter, Paul reports 5 occasions where Jews gave him 39 lashes, for what he was doing. Because I bear on my body the marks of Jesus, it says. So if Paul had agreed with those who believed that, that you had to become Jewish, then there would have been no issues, really.
And we'd all be Jewish.
Right. Or
Members of the way.
Buddhists.
Yeah, because if everybody had to become Jewish, would Christianity have survived?
Aren't we Jewish?
We are Jewish.
We are Jewish.
We study the Old Testament.
We're Judeo-Christian.
Christians are probably the ones that study the Old Testament just as much as the Jewish people do. We're kind of
We don't observe all the little rules and regulations.
We don't do that, but we use the Old Testament a lot to prove points that we shouldn't maybe prove. We use it as evidence, for things that maybe we shouldn't use.
We do that with the New Testament too.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true.
We take everything out of context.
Well, the resurrection even converted Josephus. So, it was widely known and a lot of conversions after the resurrection, but even Josephus was converted.
I didn't know that.
I didn't realize that about Josephus.
Well, he became a believer when he was asked. He said, "The man Jesus, if you can call him a man," which would indicate that Josephus bought into the resurrection.
Okay.
James basically settles the matter. Okay. But he does that in conversation with Peter and Paul. He negotiates with them, or here's what they have to say what their opinions, but he's the one in the end that makes the final decision, and that's in, I think I'm reading here. Okay, so he refers to Acts 15:23-29. And I'm going to start at 22. Then the apostles and elders with the whole church decided to choose some of their own men and send them to Antioch with Paul and Barnabas. They chose Judas, called Barsabas, and Silas, men who were leaders among the believers. With them, they sent the following letter. Okay. The apostles and elders, your brothers, to the gentle believers at Antioch, Syria, and Cilicia, greetings. We have heard that some went out from us without our authorization and disturbed you, troubling your minds by what they said. So we all agreed to choose some men and send them to you with our dear friends Barnabas and Paul, men who have risked their lives for the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, we are sending Judas and Silas to confirm by word of mouth what we are writing. It seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us not to burden you with anything beyond the following requirements. You are to abstain from food sacrificed to idols, from blood, from the meat of strangled animals, and from sexual immorality. You will do well to avoid these things. Farewell, period. So,
Good place to stop.
Short and simple.
yeah.
Yep.
Right. And do you think that, did any of this, Evans is asking, did any of these particular items go against anything Paul was teaching?
Well, if this is the part I remember, Paul was saying it didn't matter what you ate. And here it says, don't eat meat that's been sacrificed. And I'll give you a little break here and explain why, because I did read my lesson this morning. They're trying to convert pagans who have been sacrificing meat to idols. And so it's as much a way to break them from their idol worship as it is to say, you shouldn't eat this meat. It was that connection they're trying to break.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 8 and 10, there are a number of statements where Paul talks about food, and like Sarah's saying, says some people are still so accustomed to idols that when they eat sacrificial food, they think of it as having been sacrificed to a god, and since their conscience is weak, it is defiled. But food does not bring us near to God. We are no worse if we do not eat, and no better if we do. And other statements that Paul has made with regard to that. But it's in Evan's point of view, he says recent scholarship thinks that no, none of the things that are being stated in this letter from James are really against any of Paul's teachings. You know, that one commentary said that a commentator says he argues that James's letter isn't a decree, but a list of vices, not too different from those listed by Paul. You know, the question about circumcision and conversion are not even mentioned.
Okay, you need to stop because we have to go to church.
Okay, we will stop.